Born to the Blade. Season 1, Episode 1. Arrivals. Written by Michael R. Underwood. Narrated by Exie Sands. Prologue. The Golden Lord of Kakute sat in his cell, tending the flame of his spirit. For 40 years, his life had been reduced to a cell not 4 yards to a side and a hallway beyond. Guards came with food, left with waste, and that was his whole world. His last true visitor, the Empress of Mitchiko, had come most of a decade ago. She'd regaled him with how Kakute was thriving under the Empire, its children adding to the might of her navy, and of how soon his people's warlike ways would be but a shameful memory. Her cruel smile was burned into his mind like an unending sigil. But she'd failed to break his spirit on that last visit, as she'd failed before. The sound of a swinging door and hammering rain stole his attention away from his nightly exercises. He stood to watch a guard in a rain-drenched cloak walk inside. The flash of a sigil filled the room, and with uncanny speed, the newcomer's blade slashed across the necks of both guards. The two slumped to the floor, dead. She pulled keys from one guard's belt and unlocked the Golden Lord's cell. "Quick, change into the uniform," she said. "There's a cart just outside and to the left. The passphrase is remembrance." For a moment, the Golden Lord thought he was dreaming, but this was real. He traded clothes, and as he strapped on one of his jailer's side swords, an emptiness more painful than hunger filled him once more. He'd lived his young life by the blade, and now he might have the chance to turn it to rescue his people. The Golden Lord cut the sigil Enduring Mountain to refresh his stamina. With a surge of golden light, he was flush with energy, more alive than he had felt in ages. The blade nearly called for him to do more, but instead he resheathed the sword. There was little time. "Keep the cloak up, and don't answer anyone but Toku, the driver. He's wearing a golden sword pin. Now, go." "What about you?" "One guard in, one guard out. Anything else draws suspicion. I've made my choice." She chose to die. For him. She'd seen perhaps 20 years, old enough to be dangerous, young enough to throw away her life for a history she never knew. "What is your name, child?" Her voice shook. "I am Hideyama no Eriko." Hideyama. She was from the south. He remembered those mountains, that view. "I will remember you, Eriko." And then he beat his escape. Hood up and head down, he was indistinguishable from the other guards, especially in this downpour. 50 yards into the woods, he saw a blurred glint of moonlight on gold. The sword pin. "Remembrance," he called into the stormy night. A horse stirred. A man his age, maybe 65 years, emerged from the brush to wave him over to a hidden cart. They came for her quickly. Bad luck, poor timing. The reason didn't matter. The first two she caught by surprise, then two more. One caught her across the arm before she ran him through. Minutes later, 4 came at once. They could not be allowed to know that he'd escaped. He needed time. As the guards advanced, hiding behind polearms, she cut the air, forming sigils for fire, breath, and detonation. "For Kakute," she said, and the world went white. The two made their way through the muddied forest and onto the road, cloaks pummeled by the rain. Toku explained the rest of the plan. "There is a Kakute ship waiting, nestled in the mantle of the island. The captain is loyal. Stay in the hold. I'll take care of everything. We can make Twafe within a week. From there, we rally the people." The Golden Lord clapped Toku on the shoulder. "I wish I could see the Empress's face when she receives news of what you've done here today. You make your ancestors proud." An explosion rocked the cart. The Golden Lord looked back. A plume of unnatural fire erupted 50 feet into the air. Then an entire corner of the castle collapsed, spreading a wave of dust. The driver nodded. "For Kakute, we must hurry." Chapter 1. Michiko. Oda no Michiko watched the navigator of the Silver Sparrow at work in the pink skies of the morning. The navigator's blade was a plain but functional greatsword. She guided the ship with practiced grace, her blade carving great, sweeping sigils in the air that wrapped around her in all directions, igniting in shimmering white upon completion. When the navigator was satisfied with the ship's course and the strength of the sigil keeping it aloft, she finished her form and nodded to Michiko, yielding the aft deck. She'd continue her work on the foredeck while Michiko drilled. Michiko drew her own sword, a slim cut-and-thrust blade with a swept hilt, and began her forms. In the 3 weeks since she'd won the Cherry Blossoms tournament, her life had been like the breath between stillness and a lunge. She knew her moment was coming. All she had to do was wait and seize the opportunity when it came. Now it was here, and she could not wait for the next step. Arriving in Twafe, meeting Master Kensuke and the other warders, testing her mettle against the best and brightest from the other nations. Proof of Kakute's worth in the Empire. Soon the ship would be stopping in Rumika. After the governor had offered Michiko the position of junior warder, his attendant had given her a package with carefully copied reports rolled up in a scroll case, bound by a lock that could only be opened by the pommel of her blade. The report said this much. Rumika had selected a candidate to challenge for a seat at the embassy. Chris would face the gauntlet, a series of bladecraft duels with representatives of each nation, thereby seeking to earn their votes to make Chris the first warder of Rumika. It was not an unexpected move, given the turn in Rumika's fortunes, economy booming thanks to an innovation in processing and enchanting airstone. Where people from Kakute were born with the birthright to be able to speak with their ancestors, and true Murtikans the ability to remember their past lives, Rumikan's birthright involved changing bodies between male-coded and female-coded forms. Some did it as regularly as changing clothes or hairstyles. Some changed on their birthdays, and others, like Chris, followed a schedule based on religious beliefs. Some changed their pronouns when they changed their bodies. Some did not. Chris's arrival on the ship would give Michiko the opportunity to prepare her own report, a measure of this aspirant, and what challenge Chris might present to the Empire. She could begin her work for Murtika even before the ship ported in Twafe. The Sparrow made its stop in Rumika that afternoon, taking on 3 more passengers. 2 were attendants, one older, slim, with silver hair and pale features. The second was young, with wide shoulders and light brown skin. The third was a striking youth around Michiko's age, or maybe a shade older, perhaps 20. Their skin was the color of mahogany, and they had long black hair tied into a loose tail. They wore a tightly boned bodice and a flowing skirt with a tail tied up and around their waist like a belt, and carried a blade that looked valuable enough to feed a small household for a year. Its wielder could only be Chris Den, the aspirant. Hello, and welcome. I am Oda no Michiko, appointee to be junior warder of Kakute. Might you be Chris Den? I am, Chris said. Their voice was a rich, melodic alto. Chris bowed elaborately at the hip. A great pleasure to meet you, Michiko. This is Alex, my seneschal, and Nick, my valet. Michiko gave the Rumikan a crisp, shallow bow and nodded to the attendants. Pleased to meet you all. Kakute, huh? So, I'll be dueling your master soon enough. Any tips? Chris winked, throwing away the comment. Michiko smiled politely and was spared the awkwardness of replying to Chris's comment by a shout from the rigging. Monarchs! The deckhands scattered, the bosuns shouting orders, calling for sailors to arm themselves. Michiko watched them, unsure what she was supposed to do to help. Then 3 huge, jagged maws rose over the side of the ship, roaring with hunger and rage. Chapter 2. Chris. Chris drew their sword and began to carve the sigil Swift Rabbit just as the monarchs swept over the rails. The beast had shimmering gray skin, 3 rows of jagged teeth, and 2 sets of arm-long wing fins on a long body that tapered to a flat fantail. With deft movements of the wrist, Chris carved the first box, then another, then the spiral connecting them, arcs of glowing blue tracing the tip's path. The sigil flashed as it locked in, and Chris felt the magic coursing through their body. As the beast soared over the deck, Chris dove to the side, slashing at the nearest. Monarchs rarely attacked ships, and only in schools. These 3 were among the largest Chris had ever seen, 5 yards long at least. Chris grinned. These creatures would make a fitting challenge and a chance to impress Michiko and the other Kakute representatives. The sailors swung a belaying pin at another of the beasts. It shrugged off the blow and then bit and dragged them across the deck. Chris dashed after it, enhanced speed, carrying them a dozen paces in the time it would take a sailor to cover 3. Chris dove into an extraordinary lunge, spearing the monarch in the side. The monarch roared in pain, releasing the sailor who collapsed onto the deck, a shipmate diving to their aid. Michiko stepped up next to Chris, carving adamant shield. Smart. She placed it just beyond the ship, covering the railing and the masts above it. It was an impressive working. The beast would have to fly dozens of yards up to go over it or dive under the ship to attack on the other side. Chris started their own adamant shield, aiming it right next to Michiko's. The 2 shields snapped into place in quick succession, Michiko's golden dome activating just before Chris's blue. With their shields combined, they'd closed off the entire starboard side of the ship. The monarchs were wise enough to avoid the shields, but it meant that they split in their attack, one going left to the bow, the other 2 going right to the stern. "Take the one on the left." Chris sidestepped to the right and carved Grizzly's Might, a triangle comprised of the symbol for a mountain repeated 3 times beside it. As the sigil activated, Chris's blade became as a feather in their hand. With both speed and strength enhanced, Chris leaped high in the air, flipping and throwing their entire body into a falling thrust. Chris's blade speared through one of the monarchs, plunging beast and bladecrafter to the ground. Chris prepared their landing and rolled off the beast, drawing their blade out and leaving the creature to bleed on the deck. Its partner bit at Chris, who dodged back and met claw with blade. Sparks flew and the creature disengaged. To their left, Michiko scared the third monarch off with lances of energy that pierced the beast's hide like grape shot. Impressive. But Chris had misjudged the spooked monarch. It circled back and charged again, not at the deck, but at the hull. Chris heard the sounds of wood splintering and tearing. Chris grabbed a loose rope, wrapped it around their free hand, then dove off the side of the ship. Reorienting, Chris focused on the monarch, which was gnashing at someone inside the ship. Chris ran across the hull, hopping over portholes. They shouted, trying to draw the beast's attention. Instead, it lunged again, cracking more of the wooden hull and eliciting screams from inside. Chris carved Blazing Bolt, loosing a ray of energy that pierced the beast through the side. A split second later, the beast shot out from the ship, blasted back by a sigil more powerful than the quickly cast bolt Chris had used on the move. Whoever had carved that sigil was very powerful, very experienced, or both. The monarch flailed in the air, then finally thought better of its assault, diving far down toward the mists. Chris kept their momentum moving to keep from falling from the deck. "Coming in!" they shouted, jumping into the open hole in the hull. Chris rolled onto the deck and came up to see an aged, cloaked figure with a matted white beard. They held a blade like they'd been born with it, the intricate sigil for Blazing Bolt just now fading. "Who are you?" asked Chris. Another elder stepped forward. "You're not permitted to be here. Say anything of what you've seen, and the captain will toss you to the mist herself." Chris was torn between confusion, awe at the bladecrafter's skill, and the indignation at the brush-off. But the battle had been won, and there were wounded. Chris saluted the bladecrafter, then bounded through the door and up the stairs to look around for those wounded and to move debris while the power of their sigils remained. Very curious. Who was this bladecrafter? Chris might not tell the sailors, or Michiko, but Alex and Nick were their staff, and Rumicon leadership would certainly want to hear about a mysterious master bladecrafter traveling to Twafe. With the wounded tended to and the lines repaired, Chris and Michiko reclined on small stacks of cargo that had been rearranged into a makeshift seating area. Fighting was tiring, fighting using magic doubly so. "That was an impressive display," Michiko said, hands folded on her lap. "That was barely a fight," Chris said. "A beast like that is no real challenge for a bladecrafter like you or me. Your adamant shield was very impressive." Michiko took a sip of her tea. "Thank you. That's very kind. I imagine that the crew will be speaking of your exploits for some time." "Our exploits," Chris said, raising their bowl to toast. Michiko met the bowl with their own, and Chris caught the hint of a smile on her lips before she drank. Chapter 3. Ojo. Ojo Kante carved distant friends on the surface of a pool. The ritual sword was lighter than his dueling blades, but still familiar. The sigil locked, stopped, and the clear pool of water rippled, resolving into a view of his old friend Shikosi. The miner had hickory-colored skin, just a shade darker than Ojo's own. He wore an orange and blue cloth woven in triangles and diamonds, wrapped around his waist and then over one shoulder. His hair was concealed by the folded and pinned head wrap of a guildmaster.
"Good afternoon, old friend,"
Ojo said, his blade resting at his hip.
"I wish it were good. I have the latest reports from the Assayers Guild. The island's tilt has reached 2 degrees.
Ojo flinched as if struck. How could it have gotten so bad so quickly? Did they need to evacuate the western cities now, or could it wait? Did Mertika know? His people had mined too deeply of their island's airstone, building up their fleet to put Mertika in check. And now their island sank year by year. He took a long breath, gathering himself. His heart still beat like a pounding war drum.
"How quickly is it tipping?"
he asked.
"On that they are less clear. If we continue to relocate people from the western tip of the island, it may slow some. Perhaps even more if we demolish the western ports."
Demolish. They spoke so plainly about drastic concessions, cities abandoned, lives uprooted.
Will it be enough?"
Tens of thousands lived in the west, and that was just the ports and outlying towns and farms. Shikosi shook his head.
"We just don't know. One of the assayers said that they think the island could touch the mist themselves within a generation if we do not massively increase the island's airstone quotient."
Ojo's mind flashed to waking nightmares, visions of mist fiends terrorizing his people, carrying off children into the unknowable mists below.
"We will not let that happen, Shikosi. The Rumicans are sending a bladecrafter to face the gauntlet. If they succeed, I may be able to secure a steady supply of their refined airstone. And if we can avoid war with Mertika, my projections show that it would only take 5 years of trade and installation to halt the sinking."
Shikosi raised an eyebrow.
"Are these projections as optimistic as your last set of figures?"
This was an old saw between them. Shikosi saw the risks, Ojo saw the opportunities.
5 years or 7, we could do it. And a trade alliance with Rumika can lay the foundation for a defense compact. There is reason to hope, Chikosi, even with these latest numbers. The Rumikan arrives today. Let's hope you're right. One last bit of news. A Mertikan prison on Kakute was attacked. Some kind of explosion. There's a rumor that the Empire may have lost a high-value prisoner. Some say it is the Golden Lord of Kakute. That would certainly be something. How solid a rumor. We're nearly certain on the escape, less so the prisoner's identity. If it is the Golden Lord, I cannot expect he'll be headed anywhere but Twafe. If you can secure him asylum, Ojo beamed, we could drive a wedge into the Empire's control of Kakute. Maybe blunt their aggression.
This was the first weakness Mertika had shown in years. If it was true.
Perhaps ask some of your friends down island?
The guildmaster asked.
The High Skies faction will see this as a chance to make their case for a preemptive strike.
Ojo nodded.
Of course.
As Kulo's future grew more dire, the High Skies faction was growing more vocal, more aggressive. But the others were keeping them in check, for now.
Then I will leave you to your preparations. Send word when the Rumikan is ready to discuss terms. Please give my best to Nuala,
Ojo said.
Of course. When this is sorted, you should come home for a while. We miss you.
Ojo had not been home in years. There was never a good time, not with Lavinia's aggression and Kulo's scramble to reorganize their entire economy.
I will do my best.
Ojo dissolved the sigil and the image faded, leaving an empty pool showing only his own reflection. There was a presence at the door. It was Yokno Vens, the seneschal of the Warder's Circle. Yokno was a handsome man in his 50s, with light amber skin and short, once lustrous black hair, mostly gone to silver. Nothing occurred within the walls of the embassy that Yokno did not know of, including many state secrets. But he was sworn to neutrality, a model of Twafe's dedication to sign no alliances, show no favorites. They hosted the circle and enforced its laws, but nothing more.
The Silver Sparrow has been spotted on the approach. Excellent, thank you. I will be ready momentarily, if you'd care to travel out together. Warder Kensuke is waiting at the lift.
Yokno added.
Of course he is.
Ojo thought. Kensuke yielded to Lavinia at every turn, but he knew when his presence was required. And if Kensuke were to have any influence on his junior warder, he'd need to get to her before Lavinia did.
I will be right out.
Walking through the circular chamber on the way to the ancient lift, powered by magics older than any of the nations of the embassy, Ojo returned the ceremonial blade to its place on the great round table. The other 5 blades were there, hilts facing inward to show their nation's commitment to peace. That symbolism was little more than custom at times, and would be tested soon enough. Vania, Tsukisen, Kakute, Ikaro, Martika, and Kulo. This room, this circle, had been Ojo's home for many years. He just hoped that it would not also be the home of his people's downfall. Chapter 4. Ojo. The city of Twafe was unique among the nations of the sky, with 3 islands stacked one atop the other, connected by a golden tower that ran through all 3. Built long before the nations took to the sky, the tower remained a reminder of Twafe's forgotten past. Docks rimmed the border of each island. To the lowest level came the bulk freight, raw materials, and migrant workers. The middle level welcomed ships carrying trade goods, merchants, and better-off travelers. The top level, where Ojo would meet the diplomatic ship, received the rich and beloved, traveling nobles and government officials, prominent artists and performers. Ojo, Kensuke, and Yokno rode through the wide streets of the top level, each in an open carriage, less secure but far better for enjoying the city's beauty and retaining the flavor of its people. While the city was officially neutral in political matters, each resident had their own relationship to that neutrality. Ojo thought back to his own arrival, nearly 15 years previous. The city looked much as it did then. High spires, flying banners of proud houses, the embassy ringed with the flags of nations great and small. Since then, she'd seen many diplomats come and go. Throughout it all, the warders did their jobs, negotiating trade agreements, settling territory disputes, and keeping the peace. Where a conflict flared up, warders stepped in to settle the matter, sometimes with diplomacy, sometimes with the blade. The new arrivals came none too soon. Mertika banged the drums of war, parading their new and even more powerful ships, their latest levies from Kakute and Ikaro. And who would stand against them? Vania maintained their alliance with Mertika despite Penelope's concerns. Rumika was on the rise, but did not have the fleet to wage sustained warfare. Tsukisen steered clear of conflicts and alliances. That left Kulo alone to match Mertika's escalation, and for their commitment to balance, they now teetered on the edge of the abyss. New blood brought new perspectives. An ascendant Rumika could, with the right guidance, put a check on Mertika's dominance. The carriages pulled over by the embassy docks, and Ojo stepped down, peace-bound blades at his hip, silk robes in the green and black colors of Kulo. The Silver Sparrow had clearly been through a battle. Slashed and reknotted lines, mismatched sails, and a hastily patched hole in the hull. Probably a monarch attack, given the patterns. The embassy attendants scrambled into place, holding flags aloft, musicians tuned their instruments, and carriage drivers replaced functional seats with lush cushions. Everything would be perfect. Outward display was the best way to show respect, grandeur, and confidence. Ojo spotted the Kakute and Rumikan arrivals. The tall fencer with the long hair, boned bodice, and skirts would be Kristen of Rumika. The small young woman in a red silk tunic and the simple brown belt of a colonial subject, that would be Oda no Michiko of Kakute. Her complexion was the color of prairie wheat, and she had her hair tied back with a ribbon. Chris cracked a joke, eliciting a wry smile from Mitchiko. They'd had time to bond on the trip, then. Perhaps Mitchiko could be a moderating force to balance Lavinia's fervor. With time, and the proper mentorship. The gangplank lowered to the docks, and Yokno stepped forward to be the first to receive the newcomers.
Greetings, and welcome to Twafe. Your future awaits you.
Chris turned, following Yokno's voice. They put on a broad smile and ascended the gangplank, hand resting on the pommel of their blade. They moved with grace and ease and the invulnerable confidence of youth. Yokno offered a hand of greeting to Chris as they stepped down from the gangplank.
I am Yokno Vens, Seneschal of the Warder's Circle. We are honored by your arrival and offer the warmest greetings to you and the people of Rumika.
Chris thanked Yokno and introduced themselves and their companions. Rumika sends their gratitude to the people of Twafe for receiving us. Kensuke stepped forward, an older man with fair skin, a narrow jaw, and sleepy eyes. He was mostly a political appointment, as his bladecrafting skills had never impressed. The elder warder addressed Michiko, saying,
I am Haike no Kensuke, warder of Kakute. May the favor of the Empress shine upon you this day as you pledge your heart and hand to her service.
Michiko bowed low with grace and precision.
I pledge my hand, my heart, my life to the Empire.
Ojo stepped forward and caught Chris's eye.
I am Ojo Kante, warder of Kulo. As Rumika is not yet a council nation, I volunteered to serve as proxy to welcome you to Twafe. May your visit be blessed with good health and glory for your people.
Chris's eyes lit up. They clasped Ojo's hand vigorously, and Ojo met the handshake in kind. Warder Kante, your stories of your prowess have spread far and wide. I'm eager to see your two-sword style on display.
There will be time for that, I'm sure. First, we should get you settled. If you don't mind my company on the ride in, I thought it would be useful to tell you a bit more about how the warders do business, since, with luck, you will be among our number before long.
Yokno stepped back in.
We have prepared your accommodations during your visit in the temporary quarters on the embassy grounds. If you'll follow me to the carriage.
Yokno directed the attendants to handle the luggage, but Ojo had one more move prepared.
Warder Haike, if you would permit, I would love to show the new arrivals around the embassy.
Ojo had welcomed many junior diplomats in this way, giving him the latitude to extend the invitation even to an imperial candidate. But Kensuke bristled slightly.
Your gesture is appreciated, Warder Kante, but I imagine Michiko is tired after her journey. Perhaps another time.
Ojo watched the young bladecrafter's response. Michiko did, in fact, look tired, but neither did she necessarily seem pleased to be omitted from the tour. It seemed he'd need to catch her away from Kensuke to be able to get a word in. Perhaps Kensuke was just relishing the chance to exert influence without being countermanded by Lavinia. Ojo settled into a diplomatic smile.
Certainly. Michiko, I hope we will have the chance to speak soon. Welcome, and may your time here be blessed with good health.
Michiko nodded respectfully, and Ojo took his leave, gesturing the way to Chris. Chapter 5. Michiko. The Empire's embassy grounds comprised an entire neighborhood on the top island of Twafe. It had 5 buildings, a central Mertican building, and 4 outliers. The first 2 were small annexes for the islands of Esh and Yun, which had joined the Empire long ago. The others were for the newer colonies, Kakute and Ikaro.
Warder Lavinia requested your presence immediately,
Kensuke said.
She does not take well to waiting, or being questioned, or much of anything save swift and sure obedience. Serve her well, and you will have a good life here.
Serve the Empire, you mean?
On Twafe, they are one and the same. She is in regular direct contact with the Empress. Lavinia is the Empress's hand here, and we are her arsenal. Do you understand?
Yes, Warder.
A good start.
An attendant greeted them and led the pair through the grand foyer of the embassy, bedecked with banners, scrolls of commendations, and trophies of war. Michiko could have stood for hours marveling at the glory reflected by such a display. But instead, they turned through double doors and were met by an imperious woman in the uniform of a Mertican captain. Lavinia Junius was in all ways impressive. A living legend, Lavinia stood over 6 feet tall, her sandy blonde hair short in a soldier's cut. She had weather-worn fair skin, sharp features, and piercing purple eyes that locked onto Michiko like a hawk to prey. She wore stylized leather armor that suggested her history as a ship captain, her shoulders decorated with her many medals from the Empress. Standing to her side was a younger Mertican woman, perhaps Michiko's age. Like Lavinia, her hair was military short, the latest court fashion. This would be B'Elanna Avitus, the junior Mertican warder. The third was a thin man with slightly ink-stained fingers. He had bronze skin, a big nose, and a stubble-growth beard. His dark hair was tied back in a simple tail knot. He bore the sword of a warder, but did not fit Michiko's image of one. Where Lavinia and Kensuke both carried themselves with import and confidence, this man, who must be Ueda no Takeshi, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world than standing with his colleagues. "This must be little Michiko," Lavinia said. I've heard very good things about you. The Empress is pleased to have you here to do your best on behalf of your colony." Lavinia glanced briefly to Kensuke, her face moving through a scowl and then back to a resolute neutral. "A strong imperial bloc in the embassy requires that Kakute and Ikaro pull their weight in negotiations and in the dueling arena." Which meant that Kensuke wasn't pulling his weight in some way. If Lavinia was pleased to have Michiko there, did that mean she wanted to have Kensuke replaced? Was Michiko to take the mantle of warder soon? Immediately? She'd expected several years in the junior position, building relationships and honing her skills. Could I be senior warder by year's end? She wondered. Her heart soared at the possibility, but she reined it back in as Balana added, "I'm sure you'll do very well, won't she, Lavinia? For a Kakuten, of course. Your people have taken steps toward a brighter tomorrow, but still have much to learn about true strength and unity. I visited Kakute last year on the way from Murtika to Twafe, here to take up my post. Your people's music and dance are so charming. I like to think that it's like what Murtican music might have sounded like hundreds of years ago." "Our strength is your strength," Michiko offered tentatively. "And we will have use for that strength very soon. The prison containing the Golden Lord was attacked. He has violated his oath of surrender and escaped captivity. He may be on Twafe this very minute, maneuvering for a plea of asylum." The Golden Lord. Michiko restrained a snarl of hatred and a flush of embarrassment. Golden Lord Nobu was a bloodthirsty warlord, last in the line that had ruled Kakute by strength of arms. For generations, they'd waged war upon their own people, family against family. Her ancestors spoke of the endless feuds, the constant strain of castle sieges, bloodied fields, and levied troops. When Murtika offered Kakute freedom from the cycle of civil war and vengeance, the Golden Lord refused, waging a doomed campaign against Kakute to keep his stranglehold on the people. Michiko stood tall and placed one hand on the pommel of her own blade. "We will find him and bring him to the Empress's justice, warder." "Well said, child. First, we will announce the Golden Lord's betrayal to the Council and head off any warders who might seek to undermine the Empire by offering him succor. Clean up and report to your colony's chambers in the Council immediately." Michiko bowed, then stood with a start as Kensuke was already on his way out the door. She looked back to Lavinia, uncertain. Lavinia had already dismissed the others, so Michiko turned and followed Kensuke, eager not to be late. Chapter 6. Ojo. Ojo had just received a parcel of sticky buns containing a hastily written note from Shun when Lavinia called an emergency meeting. Seeing Shun's confirmation of the Golden Lord's presence on Twafe, Ojo knew the meeting could only be for one reason. He dashed off a response, asking Shun to do everything within their power to keep the Golden Lord out of sight until Ojo could secure a ship. That would be difficult. The Kulo fleet was stretched thin to the point of breaking, running goods to try to make up for the lack of airstone production and holding the perimeter around Kulo, on the edge of a shooting war with Murtika. But for the Golden Lord, he would find a way. The grand chamber of the Warder Circle was a richly appointed circular room. Each council nation had a box of seats on the innermost layer, the outer layers a sloping inclined section for the public. At the center of the room was a raised platform the warders spoke from during public session. The platform also housed the Altar of Challenge, an ancient table of an unidentifiable white pearlescent stone. The platform also housed the Altar of Challenge, an ancient table of unidentifiable white pearlescent stone. Taro, Tsuki-sen's warder, was already seated at his box's desk when Ojo arrived. From his box, Ojo scribbled a quick note and sent a runner to deliver it to Chris, inviting them to the meeting. Penelope arrived with her junior, Cassia, in tow, but did not stop to chat. Cassia carried an armful of scrolls and reports, laying them out at Penelope's table as the towering women took their places. The Murtikans came in as a group. Lavinia at the head, the others trailing behind. The fire in her eyes all but confirmed Ojo's suspicion of the reason for the meeting. Chris entered from the wrong side of the room and rushed around the circle to meet the correct steps to the guest section, one tier up from the warders' boxes. The others arrived in a flurry that soon gave way to Yokno calling the meeting to order. His voice filled the chambers, resonant and neutral without being lifeless.
Warder Junius of Murtika called this meeting, so the floor is hers.
Lavinia strode out from her box, turning as she spoke, to address the entire room. She stalked the room as if it were a battlefield, seizing the ground to defend it against all comers. Honored colleagues and distinguished guests, it is with great disappointment that I inform you that the Golden Lord of Kakute has violated the spirit and letter of his unconditional surrender and escaped from his imprisonment, killing several loyal Murtican soldiers along the way. We have reason to believe that he may be on Twafe even now, seeking asylum, despite the terms of his surrender specifically waiving that right. I call upon all of you as honorable warders invested in the weight of treaties and agreements to assist the Empire in finding the Golden Lord so that he may be returned to Imperial custody. Any assistance in this matter will be remembered by the Empire. She paused, a fiendish smile blooming. And any who interfere or offer him sanctuary will regret it. Ojo stood.
With all due respect, Warder Junius, the council here was founded on the expressed agreement that Twafe's neutrality would be respected, and Twafe has long been a place where refugees and others could find a home. There is a raft of precedent.
Other warders pounded their desks in agreement. Lavinia cut them all off, still speaking from the platform. You would know, Ojo, given that your people made a great many refugees when they cut Zenitai from the sky. Twafe cleaned up after your people's excesses there. And now you approve of its neutrality when it serves to undermine the Empire? Ojo flinched at the mention of Zenitai, but forged ahead, stepping up to the stage. He spoke to the crowd, not the Murtican.
That's a preposterous comparison. We're talking about asylum, protected in the laws of Twafe.
The terms of the Golden Lord's surrender waived his rights, all of them. She cut a hand through the air like a knife. His life is the Empire's. Penelope stood to join the fray, her voice filling the room easily.
This argument is pointless until the Golden Lord is found. Mertika cannot exert their claim until the fugitive is captured. You're wasting our time with this grandstanding, Lavinia.
Lavinia stepped toward Penelope, almost, but not quite, the beginning of a charge. Upholding the sanctity of our oaths and agreements is hardly grandstanding. You, along with all of the other warders here, know how seriously Mertika takes its oaths. To that, there was no objection. Lavinia was a cold, calculating bully, but she lived by her word.
Warder Kirkos is right, Ojo said. Without the prisoner in hand, the point is moot. Unless you have other business, I move to close the session.
Seconded, said Taro. Yokno took up the motion.
Motion has been raised to close the session. All in favor?
The vote split 3-3, the Imperial bloc of Lavinia, Takeshi, and Kensuke keeping the meeting open. But without a majority to support her claim, Lavinia's gambit was stalled. Lavinia leveled a malevolent glare at Ojo. He met those eyes that burned cold with rage and did not look away. She snarled, turning to Taro, then Penelope. They did not yield. Lavinia stepped from the platform, saying, "Then I shall bring him to you myself. This is not over." As the warders dispersed, Ojo climbed to the gallery to greet Chris. Their arms were crossed, scanning the room.
So, what did you think of your first council meeting?
Ojo asked. Are they always that contentious? Ojo waved his head back and forth.
Often, but not always. Most days they proceed very calmly. Confirmation of trade agreements, rehashing old grudges without much vigor. But some days, some you remember. I think before this week is done, we'll have one such day.
Is the law on her side? Chris asked.
Murtican law, maybe. But whether that overrides Twafe law? That Warder Junius can argue, but by default we honor Twafe law here. It was a condition of forming the Warder Circle. And if she cannot capture the Golden Lord, she'll have an even harder time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some pressing matters to attend to.
Ojo began to walk back toward his office. Are you going after him? Chris asked.
I am afraid I am not at liberty to say, my young friend. But your paths admit you to council meetings for the rest of the week, so you may be able to see the results for yourself.
Chapter 7. Michiko. Lavinia had the Imperial Warder's arm and armor to meet her at the gates of the embassy immediately after the meeting. Michiko would search the middle island with Lavinia. Takeshi and Balana led a squadron searching the lowest level of Twafe, while Kensuke oversaw what Michiko imagined would be a more cursory search on the highest island. If the Golden Lord had found refuge on the top island already, He was well supported by sympathizers. Their search was meant to find him before he could make such allies. Under Lavinia's leadership, the group interrogated merchant lords, scoured open-air plazas, overturned canvas tarps in countless warehouses, and overcovered what felt like every scrap of the Middle Island. Lavinia was relentless. Michiko drafted behind Lavinia's passion like a smaller ship in the wake of a larger to keep speed, helping her to stay sharp. It was hard to see things out of place when you were new to a city, but her freshness also meant that she saw the city much more the way the Golden Lord would, as a visitor, a stranger. So when she saw a nervous man in a threadbare cloak on the lowest and therefore coldest island check both ways before and after turning into an alley, she noticed. Rather than signaling the others, she followed on her own to make sure. Lavinia valued thoroughness, but above all else, she would value results over effort. Michiko followed while the man did not look, hiding behind a stall. She drew her sword and cast Faceless Bystander to make her fit into her surroundings. The man knocked twice, slowly, then 3 times fast. Then he uttered some words, and there was the sound of something heavy sliding, presumably a door of some sort. Michiko waited, then peeked around the corner. She saw a heavy stone slab settling into place, almost indistinguishable from the walls around it. She waved over the soldiers, who brought Lavinia in tow. "What have you found?" she asked. Michiko relayed what she'd seen, and Lavinia's face lit up with the thrill of the chase. "It's him. I can feel it. On me!" Lavinia led the group down the alleyway to the slab. Michiko stepped forward to repeat the knock, but Lavinia pulled her back. "I'll handle this. Line up, 2 columns, prepare to charge." Soldiers set their formation, and Michiko watched, blade ready, as Lavinia formed sloughing, a sigil that would turn the stone into water. The sigil snapped into place, but instead of melt, the stone exploded. Michiko flew back, hitting hard against the alley wall. There was shouting, smoke, and the flash of sigils. Only 3 of the 6 soldiers got to their feet, but Lavinia was already through the breach, her blade flashing. Michiko dashed afterward, carving falcon sight to see through the smoke. Once the sigil activated, she saw the battle unfold in the small building. An older man with long white hair and an unkempt beard flowed like crashing waves. His blade carved impeccable sigils in between cuts and thrusts. The Golden Lord. She'd seen paintings of him, burned his image into her mind as a reminder of everything backward about Kakute. And here he was, in the flesh, diminished but undoubtedly still a master. He and Lavinia traded blows, moving almost too fast for Michiko to follow. Lavinia took a glancing cut to her side, blunted by her boiled leathers. A barely parried thrust pierced the warlord's side. Michiko's heart raced with the thrill and terror of combat, but she kept steady. This moment, this bout, would be written in the book of her life, and she needed it to be a triumph. She circled the traitor, carving blazing bolt to attack him at his flank. The Golden Lord switched sigils mid-cast, carving a modified adamant shield. Instead of dissipating on the shield, the bolt turned and punched through the chest of the Mertican soldier to Michiko's left. He fell, lifeless. But with his attention turned, Lavinia moved to endgame. She cut into the Golden Lord's sword with a heavy swing, then lashed out with a fist to the traitor's temple. He dropped back, an arc of blood following the path of Lavinia's strike. The Golden Lord did not move, but Lavinia wasn't done. She stripped the sword from his hands and punched him again for good measure. "Gag and bind him." Michiko obeyed. "It is fitting that you were here to assist in carrying out the Empire's justice, Michiko. His shame is your shame, but you have helped balance the scales." "What happened with the stone?" Michiko asked. Lavinia looked back at the rubble. "Guardian's Fang. A rare sigil, very complicated. Any sigil cast upon the affected object will instead cause the object to detonate outward. I didn't think the old man had it in him. Now, back to the embassy." She'd seen death before. A duel gone wrong, a handful lost to a disaster. But nothing so destructive as this. Her stomach turned, and she looked away from the bodies, grasping for focus. "Your Excellency, the dead?" Lavinia glanced at the bodies, then shook her head as if chiding a toddler. "Call a cart. We will ride back together, and you will see that their burial fits their sacrifice." Michiko purchased a cart from a local merchant. The remaining soldiers loaded the bodies while Lavinia watched the prisoner. The whole way back, Michiko watched the Golden Lord, insistent that he would not get another chance to escape. The funeral arrangements kept Michiko up until dawn, but even then she could not sleep. Not when the Golden Lord's fate, Kakute's fate, would be sealed the next day. Chapter 8. Chris. The council reconvened first thing that morning, leaving Chris little time to enjoy breakfast before taking their place in the guest gallery. But this time, a familiar-looking man in shoddy robes sat in the Mertican box, hands and feet bound, mouth gagged. 6 armed guards stood around him. The bladecrafter they'd met on the Silver Sparrow was none other than the Golden Lord. With him in custody, Lavinia would press the issue. The Empire would see the Golden Lord executed that night. Who will stand against the Empire? Chris wondered. Chris did not yet have the right, and beyond them, only Ojo seemed to have any conviction in upholding the authority of Twafe to offer asylum. Warder He's and Kirkos' objections were procedural, not moral. How could they be so blasé about the sanctity of a life? Yokno called the meeting into session and yielded the floor to Lavinia. Lavinia stepped up to the platform, as pleased as a cat with a bird trapped in its jaws. "Good morning, warders, friends, assembled dignitaries. I stand before you with escaped prisoner in hand," she said, pointing to the Golden Lord, "to share with you as a courtesy my declaration of his impending execution this very evening for the violation of his oath." Ojo stood and approached the stage, seeming to Chris to grow taller as he strode toward Lavinia. He crossed his arms and settled into a wide stance. The light of the grand lanterns played off his muscled frame as he spoke.
"With all due respect, Warder Junius, if you were that confident, you'd have killed him already. You're here to argue your case. You've argued it, unless you have something new to say."
Lavinia stepped forward to loom over the couloir. "My case," she hissed, "is unassailable. That you challenge it is a challenge to the authority of the Mertican Empire."
That is merely your interpretation,
said Warder Kirkos of Vania. When she stood, she was the tallest person in the room by far. She had fair skin and wore her graying but thick hair in a tight, intricate braid.
Some here have made their objections clear, stated for the record.
There were several murmurs of approval from the various nations' boxes and from the gallery beside Chris, filled with local nobles and merchants with enough favor to warrant an invitation to council proceedings. Would Penelope stand against Lavinia? Rumika's report said that Vania and Mertika were on good terms, but how far did that extend?
I, Ojo Kante, on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kulo, do object to the claim by Mertika. Kulo asserts that Twafe's laws cannot and are not superseded by any agreement the Golden Lord made with Mertika, and if he is here, he may petition for asylum according to the laws of the city. Do you claim asylum?
The Golden Lord nodded, unable to speak due to the gag. A soldier moved to remove it, but Lavinia stopped him with a stare.
He must be allowed to speak,
Ojo insisted. Yokno said,
Warder Junius, for expediency's sake.
Lavinia huffed, waving to the guard. The soldier removed the cloth from the Golden Lord's mouth.
I do so claim.
The man's voice was clear, strong, though he looked small, sitting at the center of a circle of armed soldiers. Ojo turned back to Lavinia.
Then Kulo insists that Twafe law must take precedence.
Lavinia said, Unacceptable.
So be it.
Ojo drew his ceremonial blade slowly and placed it upon the altar of challenge that stood in the center of the speaking platform.
I stand in defense of the accused. My blade shields his innocence, and I will not yield. I call for a contest of bladecraft.
Lavinia scoffed. She drew her own sword so quickly that Chris was not sure she wasn't going to try to run Ojo through at that very moment. You've not bested me in many years, Kante. Today will be no different. A new voice spoke out. Today will be different. Chris turned and saw Hi Notaro, the warder of Tsukisen. He walked toward the platform, his old-fashioned arming sword out and held hilt forward. Warder He was a small man, but he looked deadly serious. He stepped up and laid his blade beside Ojo's on the altar of challenge. I stand in defense. There were gasps from the audience. By all reports, Tsukisen was famously private, their warders seldom stepping into contentious business.
Two have pledged their blades in opposition, Yokno said. Warder Junius, which challenge will you face first?
Lavinia laughed. First! She laid her sword across both Ojo's and Warder He's, murder in her eyes. I will face them at the same time. The grace of the Empress is with me, and her will shall not be denied. Chris gasped, along with a dozen others in the gallery. 2-on-1 odds were dangerous, even for a skilled bladecrafter, especially if one's opponents were equally skilled. On Chris's best day, they could scarcely consider facing 2 masters at once. Was she truly that skilled?
Very well, Yokno said. The rite shall commence in 1 hour. Warders, make yourselves ready.
The dueling grounds of the council were 1 floor down in the tower, nearly the entire floor given over to the space, covered in packed dirt, the walls lined with intricate tile murals telling the tale of the discovery of Twafe centuries ago. Tiered seats lined the outside of the room, and in the center stood Yokno and the 3 duelists. Chris watched from the lowest level of the seats, as close as possible without being on the floor itself. Ojo swung his 2 blades back and forth, stretching his powerful arms. He was the largest combatant on the field, but Lavinia had 3 inches of height on him, which would give her an advantage in measure, especially as her 1 blade was longer than either of his. Warder He was shorter than Ojo, but also very slim and would present a narrow target. Even the greatest bladecrafter could be overwhelmed, and Lavinia faced 3 blades in this contest. Then why did Ojo and Warder He look like men resigned to failure? Was Lavinia such a terror? Yokno ran a handbell, but the sound filled the entire room with a single, pure tone that echoed from all sides. The signal to attention. The seneschal held up a hand, and the 3 duelists stepped forward into a circle, blades sheathed. Lavinia spoke. I am Warder Lavinia Junius. Mitchiko claims the right to execute the deposed Golden Lord of Kakute. Warder Ojo was next.
I am Warder Ojo Kante. Kulo stands opposed, defending the right of the accused to claim asylum under the laws of Twafe.
Then Warder He. I am Warder He Notaro. Suki-sen also stands opposed. Yokno lowered his hand. All 3 combatants placed their gloved hands over Yokno's and swore the oath.
By blade and craft, I contest this claim. Let prowess and fortune determine the worthy, and let the outcome be unquestioned.
Yokno stepped back, and the combatants followed.
This will be a contest of bladecraft, fought to 1 touch per combatant.
Contests of bladecraft were the ultimate expression of the form. A single telling blow of blade or craft would eliminate a combatant. Lavinia would need to land 2 blows, 1 each, and could not suffer any in the process. Ojo and Taro stepped back, swords drawn, far enough apart for their blades to swing without worry of hitting the other, but close enough to support each other. Ojo's swords were short, slightly curved, fast and functional. What Ojo lacked in measure, he could make up with 2 blades working in concert. Across the field, Lavinia kicked up dust with her heels, pacing like a great predator ready to charge. By contrast, Lavinia's sword was long, straight, and sharp on both sides. It had a strong crossguard, which she could use to turn enemy blades, but it was still only 1 sword, and she would need to strike true twice without answer. Yokno stepped back to the edge of the field, then rang the bell twice, signaling the opening of the contest. Usually, combatants would carve sigils to improve their speed, strength, or to form defenses. Then they'd advance while using offensive spells to test one another, look for weaknesses. Ojo and Taro did just that, the Kuloi using Bear's Might, while the Tsukiseni cast Swift Rabbit, a favorite of Chris's. But across the way, Lavinia cast a sigil so intricate that Chris could not recognize it from a distance. It contained the radicals for force and for separation. The sigil snapped into place, and a nearly transparent wall cut through the field, 20 feet high, reaching all the way to the bleachers. She'd cut Ojo and Taro off from each other, and began charging directly at Warder He, her blade tracing another sigil along the way, Swift Rabbit, to match his. Chris's heartbeat quickened, their mouth gone dry. She was the most skilled bladecrafter Chris had ever seen, and Chris would have to face her soon. Ojo cast Spider's Grip and scaled the wall, his hands and feet sticking to the barrier as he ascended. He carried his blades between his teeth, like a marine climbing the lines of a ship. Lavinia unleashed a torrent of thrusts and cuts, pressing Taro and leaving him no time to carve a sigil in response. He gave ground time and time again, resorting to larger parries to force the larger woman's blade aside. Her opponent off balance and overcommitted, Lavinia reached under her blade, grabbed Taro's hilt, and pulled him forward. As he recovered, trying to hide behind his blade, Lavinia's sword arced around and cut the Tsukiseni across the bicep. One bell marked the touch, and Taro bowed, removing himself from the contest. Ojo leaped from the top of the bladecraft wall, his swords once again in his hands, and cut Swift Rabbit on the way down. Lavinia turned barely in time, pivoting in place, dodging one blade and parrying the other, twisting her body improbably as she evaded the big man's charge. She bounded back to give herself space, carving mud pit in the air. The dirt at Ojo's feet instantly became a mud pit, his feet sinking past the ankle. Ojo did not miss a beat, throwing himself to the side and out of the pit, using his body's mass to pull himself free. He carved a shield during the dive to cut off Lavinia's angle of attack. At the same time, Ojo carved Blazing Bolt with his other blade. Chris swallowed. They'd never seen a bladecrafter so skilled that they could carve two sigils simultaneously while dodging an attack. If the warders are this strong, how am I supposed to beat 4 of them in the gauntlet? They thought. Lavinia, seeing the bolt, threw her body back to dodge. The bolt from Ojo's sigil pierced Lavinia's tunic at the collar, but missed her body, piercing through the other side. Lavinia hit the ground and rolled backward, giving her space to collect herself. Ojo gained his feet and pressed Lavinia, blades whirling high and low, drastically different lines that one blade alone could not hope to parry. Lavinia moved with the speed of a ship carried by a storm. She dodged from side to side to keep one blade out of reach while she parried the other. She turned a parry into a countercut and fell into Ojo's trap. He stopped her cut with his right-hand blade, then wound his hand in the pommel of his left over and around Lavinia's wrist, twisting with both in concert to rip the blade from Lavinia's hands. Chris watched Lavinia's blade flipping through the air. Ojo's right-hand blade shot forward for the quick touch to Lavinia's shoulder. Chris gathered their breath to cheer the Kuloi's victory. Then, with uncanny precision, Lavinia grabbed her spinning blade from the air with her left hand and stepped to the side, parrying Ojo's blade and landing a counter-thrust into his shoulder. The second bell. It was done. Lavinia stepped back, sheathed her sword, then raised the gloved hand that had gripped her sword mid-blade to show all assembled that she had not cut herself, not invalidated the blow by drawing her own blood. She'd gripped the blade perfectly, exerted enough control to defend and attack at once. Chris looked to the crowd. Michiko seemed enchanted, Bologna fiercely proud as if she'd fought the contest herself. The others wore variations of shock and dismay. Yokno raised his voice.
The challenge has been bested, and Mitiko's claim is proven.
Ojo walked to the side of the arena, where a Kuloi attendant prepared a poultice and bandages. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. If he had expected to lose, why put his reputation on the line? Why expose Kulo to the Empire's ire? Lavinia called out to the room, cheeks red, nearly vibrating with energy. She looked like she could fight another duel at that moment without pause. The Golden Lord will be executed at sunset. You are all invited to bear witness as the Empress's will be done. Chapter 9. Michiko. Sunset came swiftly. Michiko took her place beside Warder Kinsuke, next to the scaffold. Lavinia would wield the blade herself, serving as the extension of the Empress's justice. Michiko steadied herself with long, slow breaths, but her ears still burned. Until it was done, something could still go wrong. He could escape again, cause more chaos and dishonor for her people. Under the Golden Lord's rule, Michiko would have doubtless been conscripted to lead a unit in warfare, to rain blade-crafted death down upon her own country people in one or another war to avenge some generations-held grudge. As a Murtican, she could become a senior warder, shape her people's future directly. She could avert wars, save lives. Now, any Kakuten could forge their own future. A street sweeper could study to be a librarian and challenge for the position. In the Empire, a person was only limited by their ambition and their capability. To Michiko's left, Takeshi stole glances at a scroll he had hidden up his sleeve. She spotted Chris in the crowd, standing with their attendants. They were dressed formally like they had been upon their arrival, a structured top and caped skirt folded up in a bold design. Ojo joined the group, and even from across the plaza of the Imperial Embassy grounds, Michiko could see the familiarity and warmth between them. That was a problem for another day. Tonight, she would bear witness to the final passing of a shameful era in Kakute's history, to carry with her as she ushered in a brighter future. When the shadows grew long and the crowd restless, Lavinia emerged from the embassy in the exquisite crimson robe of an executioner. Bellona followed, carrying a sheathed greatsword nearly as tall as she was. Its hilt was golden and encrusted with jewels. This was the blade of the royal executioner, sent here on the fleet's fastest ship to carry out the Empress's sentence. Lavinia had moved like no one Michiko had ever seen, truly inspirational in her speed, her skill, and her cunning. And Michiko would have the chance to study with her under Kensuke's supervision. The thought of training with Warder Junius made the day's tedium fly by. Lavinia took the stage. Friends, colleagues, and fellow subjects of the Mertican Empire, I bid you welcome. Tonight, Mertika gives its Kakute subjects the gift of freedom once more from the barbarism of the warlords who once ruled them in endless conflict. With the death of their former warlord, the people of Kakute may renew their oaths to the Empire. And to all others, let this serve as a reminder of Mertika's justice. 4 armed soldiers brought out the Golden Lord and set him down on the executioner's block. He looked surprisingly at peace for a man about to face his death. He'd been born to the blade, and would now die by it. Lavinia drew the greatsword from its sheath, held it aloft to catch the fire of the fading sun, then brought it down in one powerful stroke. So, it was done. Michiko felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Chapter 10. Michiko. The Kakute quarters in the embassy were filled with new furniture. Not truly new, but still smelling of lacquer and polish and bereft of smudges. Generationally new, decades old instead of centuries. Michiko imagined that in generations past, when the late Golden Lord's warder served here to defend their people's warlike ways, the quarters would have been very different. But here, everything was fashioned in the Mertican style. The one place in the quarters that still looked more Kakuten than Mertican was the ancestor shrine. Kensuke knelt at the altar, speaking in soft tones. Michiko stood beyond earshot to leave him with his privacy. Moments later, Kensuke snuffed the candles and stood. Like her, he was dressed in traditional Kakute robes here and here only, crossed collars and draping sleeves instead of the belted tunics of Mertika.
Good night, Michiko. Sleep well, for tomorrow will be a long day.
She imagined they might all be long days for some time now. Kensuke departed, and Michiko knelt in front of the shrine. She set down her lacquered box and opened the lid. She pulled out candles, paintings, incense, beads, and a small banner of her family crest, arranging them on the altar. She was far from her home, but with these, her ancestors could still find her, still guide her so that she might remember the lessons of the past. Michiko lit the candle, then the incense. She wrapped the beads around her hands and began the incantation of remembrance to open her heart so that her ancestors could find her. The first voice was familiar, gravelly, but kind. Her great-aunt Aiko. You are far from home, child. How fair the skies. We were attacked by a trio of monarchs, but no one was killed. Monarchs were not so bold in my day, though I did not travel as much as you do and will. I suppose that will depend. The Empire might need me here to stay on Twafe, but perhaps I will travel. They're treating you well? She asked, sadness in her voice. She flashed to Lavinia's intimidating gaze, Bellona's cloying manner, but also to Ojo's smile, Chris's laugh, to the sights of the city. Well enough. A lot is different, but I will find my footing. Her great-aunt receded in her mind, and her uncle Hiroaki pushed forward. Are you doing what you're told?
Your generation will prove to the Mertikans that we are worthy, that we should be welcomed as equals.
Yes, Uncle, I am doing my best. Another presence stormed into her mind, forceful, barely controlled, and foreign.
Equals? Equals? The imperialist fiends ravaged our land, stole our children, and dashed our people's history on the rocks, child. Why do you serve them so slavishly?
This new spirit shared visions with her, not as vivid or clear as sitting in front of a painting or sculpture, more like flashes or as dreamscapes. But these were nightmares more than dreams. Fields on fire, airships in formation raining death upon a village, a squadron of cavalry with a Kakutan bladecrafter at its head charging down the hill at a Mertikan convoy. But the convoy did not carry goods. It carried Kakutan people manacled and chained. This was all wrong. The Mertikans had saved Kakute from itself, ended the ceaseless wars through diplomacy, fought only when attacked, and brought stability to her people. Everything she knew said this was wrong, but the feelings and memories shared by ancestors could be nothing less than unvarnished truth. "Who are you?" she asked, voice shaking as her mind and spirit were assailed by the images from this new voice.
I am Golden Lord Nobu, son of Golden Lord Hitomi. I fought the Empress to a standstill on the ramparts of Fortress Loyalty. I fought to keep our people free, to rescue the children taken, to avenge the temples smashed. And now you serve as their lapdog? My own granddaughter? I will not have it. If my death means that I can guide you back to the path of righteousness, then I am glad to be free of that prisoner's life. We have much to do, granddaughter.
Michiko's voice caught in her throat. The walls pressed in on her, her hands shaking. "Great Hand?" she choked out, her voice shaking. "Uncle? Is this true?" But how could it be otherwise? Spirits could only speak with their descendants. Her breath came quick and shallow, as if a great metal boot were crushing her chest. The Golden Lord cut Michiko's family off.
You are Oda no Michiko, daughter of Oda no Genzo, the son of Takeda no Achie. Achie, who was my lover in the early days of the Mertikan invasion. I spirited her away, told no one that the child she bore was mine. Achie hid among the courtesans, raised her son without knowledge of his father. She kept the secret so well that the Mertikans never found her, never found him. And now have no idea who you truly are. They do not know that they have invited a golden lion into their den, who has the claws of bladecraft and the keen mind to use them to strike at the heart of the imperialist scum who stole our country from us.
Another image, that of the Mertikan Empress, eyes red with rage, lunging. Her blade pierced the Golden Lord's defenses, then his chest, and then the memory went black.
I failed to protect Kakute, and suffered 40 years of humiliation for it. But you can restore our family's honor, and that of Kakute. Free our people, Michiko. It is what you were born to do.
And then he was gone. Her other ancestors rushed forward to comfort her, sharing memories of comfort, of love. She caught her breath, the pressure gone. Her mind was a sloop tossed in the deadly winds of the maelstrom. She'd begun the day excited, confident, bursting with pride and ambition. Now she could barely stand, her mind racing, no longer certain of anything. Anything at all. Michiko dropped the beads, heard them skittering across the wood floor. She reached out and snuffed the candles, breathing in the dark smoke of the slaughtered flame. This has been Born to the Blade, Season 1, Episode 1, Arrivals. Written by Michael R. Underwood. Narrated by Exy's Hands. Produced by Julian Yap. Executive producers Julian Yap and Molly Barton. Audio produced by ARS Audio. Musical theme by Amanda Rose Smith. Copyright 2018, Serial Box. Production copyright 2018, Serial Box.